in places and doing, and there were things that I could have gotten into much further that could have taken my life. And I always had this fence around me that seemed to keep me from going too far. Fences are good, and that is a healthy fear that God gave us. And positive thinking isn't enough. You have to know Scripture. Notices in the mail. How many have ever gotten a notice in the mail and it was a lawsuit? And it started out as worry, but then because it was the unknown bend in the road, you did not know what that lawsuit ultimately meant, and your mind started to wander, and you started to think, they're going to take everything from me, I'm going to be behind bars, and none of it was true, but you began to get to the point where you entertained it, and you became fearful. You actually became fearful because of a letter, because of a piece of paper that you got in the mail. News from the doctor. How many of you have ever gotten news from the doctor and he's telling you maybe this is what it could lead into? You know, I got to tell you, you should probably stay away from reading a lot of the studies that they give you, because the studies that they give you will cause you, if you are not full of God and full of faith in Jesus, those studies will lead you to believe that you are going to die early, that you are going to have something horrible happen to you, and you can have one little tiny spot on your skin, and you can read about melanoma, carcinoma, and about these real rapid cancers that will kill you in a matter of months, and all of a sudden, every day you get up and you're looking at that spot. You're drinking your coffee. What do you think that thing's going to do? And you just keep looking at it until you worry so much about that that it becomes a fear, and then you see people dying with their hair falling out, going through chemo, and all of a sudden it rushes on you, this fear that that's going to be you in a matter of months. You know, I'm just being real with you today. And so without the Word of God, this positive thinking message, it doesn't work. Because we are all subject to fear. When the unknown happens of what's going to happen next, that's the bend in the road. And when the road bends and you can't see what lurks around the corner, it can bring on fear. The thing about this fear is that God equipped us with it. He actually made it part of the fabric of life. But the purpose of fear is it can actually make us wise enough to protect us from the unexpected. And that's what I see as this fabric that Jesus, and being with his disciples, it became part of living. And nobody is immune to it. Nobody's immune to this fear. And sometimes fear, it builds its power over us until it reaches a point of shackling us. So we can't even carry out the routine things of life. I knew a man that I had as a friend. And he got to the point where he thought he was going to die in his sleep. He had built this thing up, and he thought when he closed his eyes that he was going to die in his sleep. He was so fearful of that he tried to stay awake all the time. And then it got to the point where he actually dreaded night. He would get to the point where it'd be 5, 6 o'clock, and he dreaded nighttime, because after he'd eat his dinner, he knew that it meant everybody was going to turn in and go to bed, and he knew that dreadful giant that he faced. And see, if he could have taken a hold of some of the scriptures, and if he could have said, you know, I don't fear death, because Paul said that the sting of death has been completely taken away, because to be absent from the body is to be present with the Father, and so I'm not worried about it, and I am doing everything I can do, and God has not yet taken all of my dreams and the things that I feel like that he's given me. I haven't got there yet, so I'm not going to worry about dying in my sleep, because I haven't finished what God asked me to do, and I know that if I'm on target, and if I'm taking down those giants, then I'm going to go to sleep and sleep like a baby, and I'm not going to let that giant overtake me until I have to sleep with the lights on. And don't raise your hand, but how many of you know people that have to sleep with the lights on? You cannot go to sleep without the lights being on. Some people can't be in close quarters. The mind is a very powerful, powerful unit. And I always like to be very life application with you. I had a time several months ago where they called me in the middle of the night, and I had to rush up county hospital, and I told you all about this, but there's a point in this. When you lie there in emergency and there are people all around him and he's on life support, and I'm listening to the nurses out here right there where I can hear them, and they're saying, he's not going to make it. And when I see the one nurse, I know some of you, if it bores you, I'm sorry, but I need to make a point here for you so that you know what to do when what happened to me, you can take what I'm telling you and you can apply it to your life because it will help you. I guarantee you in the middle of the night when you're tired and when all hell breaks loose and when there are people all around you, people that have gunshot wounds, people that die right next door to you, and your grandson's lying there and the woman has to, actually the nurse already said, I can't take this, way too young, I got to get away from here, you guys got to handle this. I had a moment where I had to make a choice. I had to either let fear grip me and overtake me, or I had to say, you know, I know the Word of God. And I know the Word says that the prayer of you think about in James chapter 5, it says the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man, it has a lot of effect. And so I'm sitting there with all this blood and chaos, and you know what those rooms are like at night sometimes? That's enough to get you, it's like you want to take your grandson, pick him up, and go over to a room and be alone with God. Because that's not helping much, all that stuff that's going on. But I had a decision I had to make, and I had to decide whether I was going to step on the side of what Jesus said, or I was going to step on the side of fear, and I don't know where that would have taken me. Had I taken and chose fear for that moment, I don't know what would have happened. Not about my grandson, because he was in God's hands, but what might have happened to me. And so I got in there, I prayed. You know what I prayed? You know me well enough, those that have hung around me. It didn't matter who was there. I prayed it. I had confidence. I had a peace that came over me. I was just so thankful that I had Jesus in that room, and I wasn't like those that had no hope. I had hope. I had a master. I had Jesus. And you say, well, I'm sorry that that happened to you. That'll probably never happen to me. How do you know? How do you know it's going to happen today? What phone call you're going to get? How do you know it's going to happen next month? How do you know it's going to happen this year? So they had already been promised way before you were born. God had a promise for you. God knew you when you were in your mother's womb. It's very clear with Jeremiah. I knew you when you were conceived. That's how intimately I know you. I know your beginning, and I know your end. Who would you rather talk to? A doctor that is limited only to know you for a moment, and based on what he knows from all of the experience he's had, or would you like to be known by the King of Kings, who is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one that has no time, the one that has no limits? That's why they were so freaked out when he was walking around, because they didn't know, they'd never seen it, they'd never even experienced when Jesus would walk into a room and he wouldn't even say anything, just his presence of being all God, and demons would scream out. Why have you come to torture us? They had never, that would be kind of freaky, wouldn't it? If some guy was so full of God that he walked in the back there and any demons in the room would start crying out, why have you come to torture us? And all he has to do, because he knew exactly where the demonic presence was, he just walked over and said, now. It's not like the boxing gloves that they show where in the arm wrestling match with Jesus and the devil, there was no contest. It says in the end, to remind you, just to build your faith today, it says in the end, when this church age is over, that they will, Jesus and the power of all of heaven, God, will take Satan, Lucifer himself, and will chain him up and throw him down in a hole and shut the clamp over the top of it and keep him locked in there for almost 1,000 years. He's powerless when it comes to Jesus. But these folks here had the same problem that we have today. Fear has been described as a small trickle of doubt that flows through the mind until it wears such a great channel that all your thoughts run into it. Tiny fears that they almost unnoticed, undetected, they can build up day by day until we find ourselves paralyzed and unable to function. And there are so many varieties. I looked at this pastor that had written this book, and I saw the 6 that he had taken varieties, and all of these, if you read these, a lot of other things will be brought out of each one of these things. We're not going to do it today. But if you look at this, poverty, the fear of poverty. And then we have the fear of criticism. You can let somebody criticize you, and it can get to the point where you actually are paralyzed by what you think everybody else thinks about you and how they're criticizing you, and you actually begin to believe what they say. You believe after a while when they criticize you, come on now, don't look at me that way. I know how it is, and all of us suffer the same thing, that when we take and listen to people over and over again, we start to believe it. So we have to be ever so cautious about that. Illness, loss of love, illness, old age, and death. Where faith and fear meet. You would think that Christians would be completely exempt from fear, wouldn't you? But we aren't. And what we end up having is we end up having this that's a baggage. A baggage that we carry. And you would think that when we become a Christian that we wouldn't have to carry this baggage of fear, but think about, there's a box on the forms. And when you fill out these forms and it says, you know, tax exempt in this area, you can check the box. But with fear, you don't get to check that box. Because fear is always with us. And it doesn't apply on the forms. We can say, you know, don't you wish you could check that box, but it doesn't usually work out that way. And the Bible, it doesn't paint a picture of fear as a fear-free life that all of us will have. The disciples who had Jesus beside them, they seemed constantly fearful. Look at the fear that these disciples constantly had happening to them. Storms, crowds, poverty, loss of their leader, Jesus Christ. So look at this in Matthew 25, verse 27 with me. This is what those that had walked with Jesus for over 3 years. Well then, you should have put my money. I got the wrong scripture up there. Uh-oh. I'm sorry. But what had happened to them is they actually were with Jesus. He said, go to the other side of the lake. And they were out in the middle of the water. It got dark, a storm came up. Jesus met them walking on the water. And it's very interesting to me that fear gripped them, because they saw him walking out there and they said, it's a ghost, it's an apparition, as they began to look out there at him. And listen to what Jesus says. It's so awesome to me. He says, it is I. Don't fear. Don't have any fear, because it is me here. I'm right here with you. I'm here right in the middle of this storm. So it wasn't something that the disciples were exempt from. And last week, the proud Israelite army lived in fear of one man. Remember, we talked about Goliath. Now, these 12 spies, they go into the promised land. Think about this with me, if you can get into this just for a moment to help us today. Home at last, after generations of slavery in Egypt. Can you imagine, over 400 years? And they send out this fact-finding expedition that the 12 went out to discover was the bend in the road. So, no doubt about it, Canaan was the bend in the road for the Israelites, because they couldn't see what was up around the corner. And even though God had promised this land to them, when you read it, there was as much mystery as promise for them. You know, that's the way it is in our lives. There's as much mystery about my life and what God has promised. I find myself in the middle of San Bernardino today. And that, to me, whatever's ahead is as much mystery to me as anything in my life. Although I know God promised that wherever we set our feet, that He is going to be there, and He's going to bring success. He's going to light up our pathway. He's going to be the one to deliver us. But yet, I know that there's as much mystery in the future as there is in the promising. Isn't there for all of us today? You have promise, but isn't there a mystery in it? Because no one knows tomorrow. No one knows what tomorrow will bring. And the experience of these 12 men, that they came back with a negative report, it had such an impact on Israel that it lasted 40 years. Are you with me today? Don't go to sleep on me today, please. These 12 guys go up there, 10 of them come back. They have this where they all get together, this delegation, and they come back and they tell all of them, even though they knew that from the people that had told them that they were ancestors, said God's going to give you this land. And remember that they had been there before, but they left captive for over 400 years. God says, I'm going to bring you a man, Moses. He brings you through the Pharaoh. It's that whole thing that they went through, and then across the Red Sea, and now they get across the Red Sea, and it's right there in front of them, the bend in the road. Moses says, go check it out. And 12 of these guys go up there and check it out, and 10 of them come back, and they were so powerful in what they said that all of those that were, you read the story, that were all those that weren't teenagers, all the old folks like us, they had to wander for 40 years in the desert and go through hunger, go through thirst, go through trial after trial after trial. They died and they were buried there in the wilderness. Can you see the story? Can you see what God is trying to teach us today? That do you want to wander the rest of your life? You want to take what God gave you today, whatever promise He gave you today, that you take it, you take ownership of it, and you step into it, instead of saying, well, a lot of people say that at my age it can't be done. A lot of people say we don't have the money. A lot of people say that we're just not charismatic enough. A lot of people say we're not educated enough. A lot of people say we're in the wrong place. A lot of people say this and say that, until we begin to believe it. And then if we take that on and actually believe what people are telling us, guess what happens? Yeah. You wander for the rest of your life. This is the application today. Do you want to wander the rest of your life and keep getting up every day, just going from place to place, never actually getting to walk in the fulfillment of Christ and what He has for you? Or do you want to take what God said is yours and
take it now.
Get a hold of it? You got to make a decision. And when I see this, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw Him walking on the lake, they were terrified. How many of you have ever been terrified? I have. How many of you, don't raise your hand, but how many of you have ever been awoken in the night and you think you're going to die? Come on now. You start feeling a pain in your chest, you start feeling funny, you think this is it. Remember Sanford the Son? He would lay back in the chair. What was his wife's name? Elizabeth! Elizabeth, I'm coming home! And so I talk to people. They tell me they are awakened in the night and they think it's their time. They called me on the phone and they said, I think I'm going right now. I'm dying. And they can entertain that thought long enough to where they actually believe that's going to be their last night. So these guys were terrified. It's a ghost, they said. And they cried out in fear. So when you are a Christian, you think that you wouldn't have that baggage with you. Walking along as a believer, you still got that fear. But it's what you do with that fear. And so they said and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It's me. It's me, Jesus. The one that was with you for all of these months. The one that you saw raising people from the dead. The one that you saw healing lepers. The one that you saw casting out demons. It's me. That's what Jesus is saying to you today. I cannot get passionate enough about this. I walk like you walk. I have problems. I have fears. I have things that are terrifying. There's nothing worse than having your child, one of your children or your grandchildren, in the position that I found. Nothing. I don't think there's a bigger fear that can happen. You can put a guy with a gun in my head. You can put a guy that's going to knife me. But that doesn't even equal the fear that when your baby is laying there and they're lifeless and you think they're going to die, there's nothing like that. So you got to make a choice. You got to decide, are you going to be on the camp of the 10? So this is impossible. We could never do it. Even though God promised us, God, you need to go back and you need to recalculate this, because did you see who's over there? You're telling us that that's already ours. I don't think you saw the size of those guys over there. We say that today. We say, I don't think you know what I'm facing, God. I don't think you know the addiction. I don't think that you know the problems. I don't